I'm so excited you all have joined us for tonight's talk with Christian K. Lee. I'm the Executive Director of San Francisco Camerawork, and I want to welcome you all. We traditionally begin each of our public programs with a statement to acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of this land that many of us call home. We are called San Francisco Camerawork, and what is now the San Francisco Bay Area is on the stolen and unceded land of the Ramaytush and Muwekma Ohlone people, to whom we owe a collective debt. We thank the indigenous peoples of the Bay Area for stewarding this land throughout the generations. We've all benefited from being settlers, and we are incredibly grateful. Please let us know in the chat where you are joining us from tonight with the present name of the place and the name of the original inhabitants. We put a link in the chat so you can look up your area. Excuse me, got some allergies. Before we begin tonight's talk with Christian, whose works we have on view on our website, and they seek to undermine media stereotypes about Black gun ownership, I want to acknowledge that on Sunday, a horrific act was committed in our state capital, Sacramento, where 6 people were killed and 12 injured due to the gun violence. SF Camerawork mourns the loss of the precious lives of Jontaya Alexander, 21, Melinda Davis, 57, Sergio Harris, 38, Joshua Hoye Lucchesi, 32, Yamil Martinez Andrade, 21, and Devazia Turner, 29. Please join me in a moment of silence for the victims and their families. Gun violence is a daily tragedy that affects the lives of countless individuals around the world and has reached a level of crisis in our country. More must be done at all levels to enact rational and responsible gun regulation and prevention laws and programs. While this program was planned in advance of Sunday's events, Christian Lee's work is part of that larger national conversation. Tonight, Christian will be providing background for the work we have on view, but he will also be a part of a more in-depth conversation on media bias and Black stereotyping that we are hosting on Tuesday, April 26th, where he and the photographer Stephen Shames, who is perhaps best known for his work on the Black Panther Party in the 60s and 70s, will be discussing their work in that context. We hope you will join us for Tearing Down Stereotypes, Christian K. Lee and Stephen Shames on Undermining Media Bias, moderated by Dr. Travis L. Dixon. Dr. Dixon specializes in the investigation of racial stereotypes in the mass media and their impact on audience members, and is Director of Graduate Study and Professor in the Department of Communication, the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I also want to quickly put in a plug for a few of our upcoming programs. We have brought back our popular Artist Toolkit programs, and on Tuesday, April 19th, we will be presenting Writing Your Artist Statement with Dorsey L. R. Santos from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. Then on Tuesday, May 10th, from 6 to 7, Katina Alexopoulos and Ashley Ross will be in conversation about their work in the FORECAST exhibit. And Marna Clark, who has an online exhibit on our website currently, will be giving her artist talk on Tuesday, May 24th from 6 to 7. And more upcoming programs are available and can be seen on our website. Now, I am so pleased to introduce Christian K. Lee, who is a documentary photographer born in Chicago, Illinois. His background as a photojournalist drives his desire to utilize art as an investigative tool that is used to undermine Black stereotypes. His work has been honored by the Sony World Photography Awards, Critical Mass Top 50, Arnold Newman Prize, the Royal Photographic Society, Head-On Photo Festival, Pictures of the Year International, and the Silver Eye Center for Photography. His work has been featured in, commissioned, and or licensed by Lens Scratch, Forbes, The Guardian, National Geographic, Rolling Stone, and The Washington Post. His works have been shown in one-person and group exhibitions at the Griffin Museum of Photography in Winchester, the Royal Photographic Society in Bristol, BBA group exhibition in Berlin, the Studio Gallery in Paris, France, and of course at San Francisco Camerawork in FORECAST 2021. Lastly, just a bit of housekeeping. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions. So please put your questions in the chat and we will, and please mute yourself during Christian's presentation. I also want to note that closed captioning has been enabled and can be turned on in your settings. We will also be taping the program, which will be available on our website later this month. So now, without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Christian.
Thank you, Olivia. Thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for coming out, taking time out your day to come and spend some time with us. So yes, I'll go ahead and share my screen and get started. So currently I've been, as Olivia said, I've been doing a lot of work on documenting the complicated relationship between African Americans and the Second Amendment. It's a very interesting relationship. But I think before we even get to that, what's important is to talk about how I've gotten to this point of my career, what led me to want to talk about this, right? And I think it's no better place to start. One second. My computer's acting up a little bit. Bear with me, you guys. Okay. And I think it's no better place to start than the Ferguson unrest. This was one of the first times, again, that I felt motivated that I could really use my camera in a way that can encourage change in my community. You know, I saw people from my age group when I was an undergraduate in college, going out into the community and standing up for what they thought was right. And I felt very empowered to go out and document this. The way this ties into the work that I'm creating now is, I feel like the work that I was creating here was very reactionary, right? Again, this was the shooting death of Mike Brown. Again, talking about that relationship where we're seeing Black people in this complicated relationship with guns. You know, every time I saw the gun on TV, it was of Black people doing something bad, like being drug dealers or gangbangers, or being shot by police. And I was very interested in why was this the overwhelming message being shown to me. But at this time, as an undergraduate in college, I wasn't thinking about the work that I was making right now. I was just filled with passion. I wanted to go out there and I wanted to make work that I felt like was necessary. Nobody was paying me. You know, I didn't get paid for this work. This was like one of the first times. This is not the first time I started taking photos, but it was like the first time that I felt like my work can make a change. And from this body of work, I was able to secure an internship with the Washington Post and the Associated Press. And it allowed me to further garnish my voice. As you see, I'm not going to talk a lot about the images because my goal here is to bring us down a glide path, not necessarily talk about individual projects per se, but I will touch on them a little bit. So I think, again, I worked on a lot of work, but I think this was another pivotal point in my career during COVID. I started working on a project called Cancel Prom. And again, I always kind of been interested in looking at what the media was doing and looking for the small stories. And I think this is when I really got excited with portraiture and seeing the power that portraits can do. On the TV, we saw the COVID deaths. We saw grocery stores being sold out and all of those other things. But I think I wanted to focus on the quieter moments. And again, I want to tie both of these together because COVID, you know, I was looking at how guns were affecting our community and how Black people from my community or minorities were being negatively represented in the media in relation to guns. But then in this project, I became very interested in portraiture. I became very interested in portraiture. And the impacts that I was able to make by doing it, you know, this young lady who I photographed here, she wasn't going to be able to go on her prom. And, you know, I thought about like, hey, you know, if I was back home in Chicago, I'm in Texas right now. If I was back home in Chicago, my cousin was actually going on prom this year. And I was thinking like, man, if I was home, like I'll be the family photographer. You know, I'll be taking photos for my cousin. She's not getting a prom. She's not doing things. So I was like, what would I have done for her? And then what would I have done for her? And I realized that there were people in my own backyard that needed my skill set that I would have done for my own cousin. And that's what encouraged me to go out and make this project. And I was studying paintings. This was a group of people who I felt like didn't get a chance to have their moment in the light. And I wanted to look and see, okay, back in the day, I wanted to see what painters were doing to uplift people of high status. I felt like these people deserve their moment in the sunshine. And I wanted to bring that same style to my images. And as you can see, I started to utilize some of the techniques that I was seeing in some of these royal paintings, like where you could see in her hands where it's very small gestures. It's just in allowing a person's true soul to come through the image. I kind of stopped coming from the point of like overposing people and just let their true soul come to the image. I know I probably could explain that better, but for me, when I'm doing just when I'm having people pose in just subtle gestures, it's like it becomes less about how I envision them and it becomes more about them. So, this is the last photos in the series, and I want to talk about this image because again, like I was talking to a lot of people, you know, parents were excited, people were crying, you know, people were really happy to see their children in these dresses or these suits that they had bought months in advance, and they thought that their children was never going to get a chance to see it. So parents were really happy. And again, you know, I photographed I photographed her. And I remember I said that I wasn't going to take this photograph because I remember it was a conversation with the parents, and the daughter said that she didn't want to wear a dress. And I made it up in my mind, her mother really wanted her to. And I made it up in my mind that if her parents were going to force her to wear this dress, I was not going to do it. So I went out of town, forgot all about it, because I put it off in my mind that I wasn't taking a photo. And then I got a call one day like, hey, we're all outside. We're here. We're waiting on you. Like, and I'm like, oh no, like, dang, they all dressed. Like, I can't not go take this photograph now, you know, like I would be a total crappy person. And I arrive and I get there and I see this and I see her and she's in this dress. So I'm completely upset. I'm calling my friends like, bro, I didn't want to do this. But then again, when I look at her and I look at this image and I'm looking at her eyes, I'm seeing the way her hair is cut. And I could tell that, you know, she's totally, I'm not going to say she's not happy. Like if you look at her family in the background, you know, they all have smiles and she kind of has like a stale face. And I feel like this is like one of the moments again that I love, that just not overly trying to pose them and not trying to make them overly happy, that her true spirit was able to shine through through this image, you know. And it kind of gets me to the point of, hey, when you're documenting things with truth, it's like you can't hide truth. No matter if you want to throw a dress on truth, you still cannot cover it up. And I eventually said that yes, I was going to use this image and I was going to put it as part of the series. So that concludes that part of the series. So okay, bear with me. Having some, there we go. And that brings me to my next project, which is the project that I've been working on for a little bit over a year now. And before we even hop into this, I just want to say that, you know, I'm not trying to convince anyone to like go out and buy a gun, or that guns are cool, you know, or to even have a stance on guns. The only thing that I really want to talk about with this project is the complicated relationship that African Americans and minorities of all groups, which I will show, have had in relationship to the Second Amendment. You know, that's essentially what I want to. That's essentially what I want to show, and show through one of what a lot of Americans would consider to be their most valued ideals, that there's still a hypocrisy within it, that there's still injustices. And through this one amendment, we can explore the rest of American society and the hypocrisies and the injustices that exist. Okay. And before I hop in, I do want to dedicate this to my father, who was a police officer in Chicago. And he taught me a lot about protecting myself. And I think he really did give me a good, an interesting outlook on life. Because I always say that I feel like I can see the world from both sides, you know. For example, you know, I lived in the Inglewood community, Chicago, what some people would consider to be a pretty rough neighborhood. But my father was also a police officer in Chicago, you know. But I also, in my local community, there were good people, but there were also drug dealers, and there were gangbangers, and there was poverty. So I always could understand both sides. Like, you know, I understand what it meant to be Black in an impoverished neighborhood, but I want my father to come home at the end of the night, you know. So it gave me a very interesting outlook on life. And if we're going to start talking about the complicated relationship between African Americans and the Second Amendment, we have to talk about the Mulford Act of 1967. And the reason why we have to talk about the Mulford Act of 1967 was because this was a policy that came into play to pretty much stop the Black Panthers, or African Americans per se, from exercising their Second Amendment rights, which I think is very interesting, because if you look at the groups that generally fought for this bill to exist, they're definitely against gun rights today. I mean, gun legislation today. For example, you had the NRA, you had local police groups, you had state legislators that typically align with these groups. At this point, they were saying, no, we want to legislate guns. They were pushing for gun legislation, which is a complete juxtaposition to what we see today. And if for what we see today, and even outside of that, we confer, if you could go back into history a little bit with me and look what happened with the Bundy trials in Nevada, when a farmer and other militia groups had police officers at gunpoint. Could you imagine if this was the Black Panthers? You know, you see police cars, you see citizens. This is something that the Black Panthers would have never been able to get away with. And you see that these same groups that were pushing for tougher gun legislation on the Black Panthers, you don't see that same energy with groups like this today. And before I go any further, this is like one of the first times photographing that I set out and did a lot of research. I studied a lot of law. I studied a lot of policies, read Constitution verbatim, you know. I looked at books, and this was one of the first books that inspired me. This Nonviolent Stuff by Will Get You Killed by Charles E. Cobb. And he really did a good job of going through the civil rights era and seeing how guns made the civil rights movement possible. It's a movement where a lot of people view as a very peaceful movement, which it was. But a lot of people don't know that Martin Luther King owned a gun, and Martin Luther King actually applied for, I believe, a conceal and carry permit. Not, I believe, I just can't remember if it was a conceal and carry permit or the right to just carry, period. He applied for the ability to be able to carry a gun, and he was denied by his local legislation. And these are things that I never knew about until I started reading books like this. And I came across this book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. And she does a really good job of going into history and looking at literal laws and literal policy that were on the book that really talked about, as she calls it, race and guns in a federally unequal America. And that made me start thinking about, okay, what are the images that I'm not seeing? Like, I've seen women as victims on TVs and in movies. I saw Black people as victims in at the hand of police officers, or even as the aggressors at what some people would refer to as Black on Black crime. But like, I never saw Black people or women per se, or any minority group per se, in a position where they were using a gun for some type of good for their life. You know, I saw pictures of cowboys. I saw pictures of cowboys, but not many Black ones. And I wanted to go, I didn't have any goal at this moment. My only goal was to go create the images that I didn't see. That was my only goal. Like, I thought it was something very interesting about the unbalance of imagery that I was seeing in America. And we're gonna see it later. I mean, and we're getting to the point that we can already see now how we got here. And we're gonna dive into some of that later. Again, I never saw a Black guy in a business suit with a gun. I saw a Black dude sagging his pants with a gun. I saw a Black guy, you know, portrayed as a gangbanger with a gun. Why didn't I see people that look like this that were using a gun just for the safety of themselves or to protect their homes? That was very interesting to me, and I wanted to make those images that I was not seeing. And again, you see, I'm still using the same technique where I'm not overly posing the people that I'm photographing, because I don't know where something just clicked for me, where it's like, I don't have to overpose them, you know, who they are. Just letting them sit there and be who they are is more powerful than anything that I could ever pose or try to envision upon them, you know. Yeah, as you see, I'm not going to talk a lot about the images because, I mean, I say a lot of times when people see my work, it's like a mirror. You know, people form their opinions of what they think the body of work is before they even see the body of work. So I think, and this is a very pitted conversation. So for me, it's very important to stay away from feelings and opinions. For me, it's important to paint a very clear timeline with law. Things that cannot be debated, with actual historical events, things that cannot be debated. And speaking of things that cannot be debated, we have to talk about the Uniform Militia Act of 1792, which was pretty much a law that came out that says that all white males between the age of 18 and 40 are mandated by law to go out and join their state militia. Now we'll see later on, this actually becomes like our national guard, but laws like this began to form the basis of why. I must go a little bit further right here. It mandated that all white males between the ages of 18 and 40 go out and buy a gun. But most importantly, what this did was this created an imbalance in society. This created a group of people that were able to defend themselves against all people. And this created an imbalance where these group of people had a certain authority over their wives, over minority groups, over the LGBTQ community, you know. As you see, again, like I said, this act is pretty much in line with what causes what we have the National Guard today. As you see, women in the military are just now getting full rights. Minorities and LGBT community in the military are just now getting full rights. So I'm very interested in how did we get here? How did we get to where we at in society where only a certain group of people really identify with the Second Amendment and others don't? Again, I was thinking of the images that I was not seeing because of this. I was not seeing images of same-sex couples who wanted to protect each other like I was of white cowboys, you know. I just was not seeing those images. And it was very important for me to go out and create these images. I wasn't seeing Black fathers that were not thugs, that just wanted to protect their home or wanted to teach their children how to hunt. I was not seeing these images. I was seeing it of other people, and it became very troubling to me. You know, what is society trying to teach me? You know, it became very troubling for me. And I start to think about, when I start to think about this imbalance in society, which I talked about with the Uniform Militia Act of 1972, who did that empower in society and who did that leave out of power? You know, I think of this Ida B. Wells quote: "A Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every Black home." It goes a little further. Her quote goes a little bit further, says to demand, to give yourself the ability to get access to the freedoms what the government would not give to you openly. Meaning, if you're a Black person in a small rural town, and if you go to court for defending yourself against a white person or somebody, I mean, I'm just gonna be very blunt, like very blunt. If you stood before an all-white jury, would you get justice? You might not get justice in a court, but at least you have the justice for your life at that moment. These are the things that I begin to think of. These are the things that I begin to think about. I began to think about Lita Harrison, who's a single mother who was going to a domestic violence incident, and her husband, and one of her quotes, she says that, "I'll never be that scared of somebody ever again." She started thinking about how would she protect herself? How would she think of her? How would she protect her two daughters? And for her, her choice was to use the Second Amendment. And I started to think about other things, like as a Black man growing up a lot, I always thought about if I needed to stand up for something and I needed to use my freedom of speech to stand for something, who would I be? Would I take the Martin Luther King approach, or would I take the Malcolm X approach? And I think a lot of times, a lot of Black people, you know, ask themselves at this point, at some point in their life, you know, am I gonna do a sit-in? Or, you know, am I gonna take more of a Black Lives Matter approach? Am I gonna do the MLK approach? Or I'm gonna take a Malcolm X approach, saying that if you harm me, I'm a peaceful person. I'm a very peaceful person, and I love all people. But if you harm me, I will meet your violence with violence. You know, I'm not gonna sit here and I'm not gonna be spat on while trying to march peacefully. I'm not gonna have a dog sit on me while I try to march peacefully. I'm not gonna be beat. You know, I'm going to defend myself. I thought it was something very sick with that mindset that I was taught, that in order to really get people to understand my pain, they have to see me hurt, and I cannot defend myself. I think it was something very sick about that. And yeah. And I was thinking like, okay, because of that, here in Texas, I see people training their children, teaching their children proper gun ownership at a very young age. And I photographed the daughter, a family's daughter, and they said it dawned on them one day when they were sending their little black daughter to school, and they realized that they were sending their kid to school with other people who had training on guns. You know, their children at school, they had guns, but their black daughter didn't. And if for some reason they were at their house and their child's friend put a gun on them, would they have the ability to defend themselves? And their question to that was no. Our children was improperly prepared living in Texas. So they sought out too, correct? I'm not talking about this family. It's some family that I eventually did not photograph, but these are the conversations that I was having with people in the Texas community. I wasn't seeing black hunters. I never saw a black hunter until I started seeking them out. Again, as you see, I'm not going to talk a lot about photos. If you have questions, please write them down and I'll get to them at the end. But I think for me, it's very important to bring us down this glide path. So you have the Second Amendment is formed. Oh, that's a repeat image. But anyway, you have that the Second Amendment is formed. And we'll see that we have to look at history. You know, a lot of people say that the American laws are very racist. I mean, and it's true, because you have to think about the time where this policy was put into place. Slavery was still in existence. Members of the LGBTQ community did not have the rights that they have today. Women did not have rights. This law was only created for a certain group in history. And I would argue that it's between the age group of 18 and 40 white males, as we see that was an actual law on the books in actual reality, right? We see that when the Second Amendment was formed, it was formed at a very racist time in America. The Second Amendment was actually put into place because at this time you had slave revolts. You had slaves that were trying to fight for their rights to get out of slavery. And the only way that the states were able to crush these slave revolts were through militias. Now, for context, we have to see that at this time, the states were trying to become one union, the United States of America. We were at a very young age in that union. So the states did not trust each other. The states did not trust the federal government. And you'll see a lot of people still today fight for state rights. And you'll see that that was deeply rooted in this time era, where you had the state saying, hey, our economy is based on slave labor. Our economy is based on slave labor. So we don't trust you, Mr. Neighboring state, to come over here if our slaves get out of hand. We need something on the book in law that gives us the ability to protect our economy at the state level. And for a lot of people, that was militias, and that was the Second Amendment. And that's why when you see people joining militias today, I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, I don't mince words in this project. I kind of take pride in being very, very blunt. There's people, it's usually the people that you would consider to be kind of not on the side of like open to women rights or LGBTQ rights or women rights. I won't go as far to call them races, but they definitely tend to far, very far against those group rights. And they know the history of the Second Amendment. They know the history of the militias. It's deeply rooted in crushing slave revolts, and making America go to a place, making America go back to a place where they felt like it was the best. It was this time point when these groups did not have rights, So we see that the Second Amendment actually does have a very troubled relationship with African Americans and other minority groups. And that's where I conclude my talk. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Christian. That was amazing to get that history behind what spurred on this project and, spurs on your work in general. So let's see, I'm going to look through the questions, and I'm hoping that people will have more questions to ask. Let's see. So I'm not sure if you know, somebody referenced an article, and this doesn't really, this pertains more to the subject than your artwork, but they're asking about a study about higher homicide risk in homes with handguns. Again, I know this is more about the nuts and bolts of what you're dealing with, rather than like with your approach to making art, to kind of undermine the stereotypes. So I'm not sure if you'll have an answer on this particular question or not.
Yeah, I think they're very asking about the statistical issues that it revolves gun violence in a home. And again, like, my project is really not about that. It's typically more about the media stereotypes. And that's what I like to keep it on, because there's so many subtopics in this work. And again, like I say, this body of work is like a mirror. So when you see it, you go home and your life experiences are reflected back upon you. So if you grew up in a city like Chicago, where I'm from, and you see gun violence, you think about the gun violence in relationship to guns. If you grew up in Texas and your family hunts, you think about that when you see my work. So I'm more interested in the complicated relationship between African Americans and the Second Amendment.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to ask a few questions. Going back to your art. Mm-hmm.
I do want to say, guys, thanks for chiming in. I know this is a very sensitive topic, and you guys might be a little jittery, might not think it's your place to ask me a question, but it's very rare that artists get a chance to like talk to people that see their work. So if you ever had a question, like, I am really looking forward to chatting with you. I won't take anything negative. I won't. I'm very open. So, hey, it's really nothing bad that you can ask me. Go ahead, Olivia.
Yeah, well, while we're waiting for questions to come in, I have a few that do relate to your art making practice, and essentially your choices and how you're composing an image. One of the things that really struck me about the portraits of the families and the people with the guns was there's an incredible intimacy to the photographs, and there's this beautiful sense of the relationships, especially in the group photos where you have either couples or families, and the interactions between the people is really quite poignant and beautiful. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit more, just about your choices on, how you're setting up the photos, and, how you're arriving at those final moments when you're photographing. I mean, the other thing to note is that you're using a medium or a large format camera, correct? A 5x7 view camera to make these images?
4x5.
4x5. Sorry. Yeah. So anyway, I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah. So how do I go about ending up at the image that I was creating? You know, one of the things for me was I wanted to show homeowners. I wanted to show homeowners because one of the biggest things that I felt that I was overly saturated with was Black people either being shot by police officers or Black people shooting each other or minorities shooting each other. But I never saw it used for this other purpose. So that was like one of my biggest things. And in order to do that, most of these people that I photographed, I'd never photographed them on the day that I met them. You know, like I met them, we talked, I figured out what was unique about where they were at in their life that could shed a different light on this image. Maybe they were a homeowner, maybe they were a couple, maybe they were a single Black man, maybe they were a single woman with daughters, you know. I wanted to make sure that I captured that full array. And the way that I got to the end point was just talking to people. Like I said, I've been doing this for working on this for a little bit over a year now. So everybody that I talk to, I have people that I still keep in the contact to this day that I still go out. I'm actually going out and I'm doing audio interviews now because I'm getting ready to move to Chicago in about 2 months. And yeah, it's just building a relationship. These are not people who I got my image and I'm gone. Like these are people who I plan on keeping a relationship with over the years.
Great. Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit more about the audio in a minute. There's another question that came in that asks, how did you go about finding your subjects and what are your challenges with the project? Great work, they said.
Yeah, thank you. Let me see who asked me this. Pete, thank you for asking me that question, Pete. Thanks for being the first one to step up. No, I'm just like, what are some of the challenges? You know, a lot of the challenges were very internal, I'll be honest, because one of the first challenges I had to get out of was thinking that because I was talking about such a strong project for Black people and minorities, that there wasn't gonna be white people that supported me. Like, I know that sounds crazy to think about that, but like, you have to look at my environment. I'm in Texas. Most gun stores do not look like me. This is where I'm meeting the people that I talk to, you know, which honestly, they hold different viewpoints as me as well. So I knew that I was going to be an outsider in a lot of arenas, but I found that it was actually the opposite. It was actually the opposite. Stores where I walked in and just from the first moment, I'm like, these people are racist. I could just smell the racism. The camera allowed me to break down that barrier and form a relationship with them. And I'm almost coming to tears. This is why I love photography so much, because I'm talking to people that I would have never talked to if it was not for the camera. Meeting people with different viewpoints. You know, you think about what it means to be an American. You know, a lot of times we have our viewpoint and we won't even entertain another side of you. I think what's more American than being able to sit down with somebody that shares a complete different standpoint than you? That's what we're missing in America today. I'm almost gonna come to tears, but the camera allowed me to do that. And to answer the other part of your question, this is how I met the people. I went to places where I was the most uncomfortable. Gun stores, the gun ammo aisles of Walmart or sporting good ranges, you know, talking to people that looks nothing like me or don't have values like me. Those were some of the challenges that I faced, and those were some of that's how I was able to meet the people for these projects. A lot of these people that were referred to me was referred to me by people that look nothing like me, until I got into the community, the Black gun owner community here in Texas, and they referred me to other people.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I'm gonna go through here and try, they're coming in now, so thank you, everyone. So how much, Anne asks, how much of the final image is a result of the suggestions made by the subject in your collaborative discussions?
A lot. A lot, because like, for example, there's a photograph that I have, and this dude, he has a shirt on and it says that oh no, I need to talk about another photograph. It was a photograph that I showed with a male and his family. I'm gonna share my screen. You see, and his family. And the first image that I took of him, this was like the replacement image. The first image that I took of this guy, oh, this is gonna make me go all the way through. The first image that I took of this guy was, oh, here. I photographed this guy eventually individually by himself. I was thinking of what was gonna be the image that was gonna capture people's attention. And like, I had him around with all types of guns, had guns all in the background, guns set up all around him. I was like, yeah, you know what? That's gonna be the image that gets people attention. And every time that I talk to this man, all that he would talk about is his family. All he would talk about is how he wanted to protect his family. And I was trying so hard to force an image on him. Until one day, I took the image that I forced, but I looked at the image and I looked at our interview notes, and I'm like, this has nothing to do with what you told me who you are. So I went back, and the wife initially did not want to be photographed. And after weeks, and I think about a month, she finally agreed to be photographed. So I would say it was a very collaborative effort, not looking at what I wanted the image to be, but making sure that I was truly representing the person in the photograph.
Great, thank you. And unfortunately, that image didn't pop up when you shared your screen. I'm gonna go ahead and read another question. Okay. So Cindy asks, were the stories from the people who were photographed that shared, were there stories from people who were photographed that shared complex or ambiguous emotions about gun owning?
Yeah, I would say most of the Black gun owners, because one person that I photographed, they were from Chicago and they moved to Texas, and they admitted that, hey, if I was in Chicago, I really wouldn't feel safe teaching my child this, or we didn't even feel safe owning a gun in Chicago because even if we're homeowners and not thugs, if we would try to use this in the confines of our home, would we get the same justice? Or if a police saw it in my car while I was driving back and forth, would I get the same justice? And they felt safer doing it here. But this was a group of people that wanted to utilize guns for the safety of their home and their family, but they also acknowledged the other complex sides of this, and not ignoring that, not ignoring the mass shootings, not ignoring the fact that we have a serious gun problem in our country. And I think it brought me to a higher avenue of thinking, is that I think a lot of times people try to pit people against each other, that says, if I'm on the left, I cannot agree with anybody on the right. I think what this project does is that it allows me to acknowledge both, that there is this woman who was beat on by her spouse. The only way that she could really protect herself and her daughters is by using this gun. But on the same token, we definitely have an issue with mass shootings and laws in our country. Both can exist at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive, like one can exist and one can't. And that's a lot of time people would try to force you into that argument, that if I point out one useful tool for guns, it's like, just because I said that, that ignored that all of this is an issue. No, I'm acknowledging that all of these things are existing at the same time. I don't know the solution. I'm not a politician. I'm an artist, and I choose to talk about this right now, you know, so.
All right, we're running out of time. I'm going to try and get through a few more questions. I'm going to do one more about the portraits of the people with the gun owners, and then there's also a question about the prom series. So this particular question comes from Kendall Gilliam. They say, having the privilege of assisting you on commissioned work, I know that you've captured beautiful photos of Black men in their homes with their firearms. Why did you decide to highlight your subjects outside their home rather than inside?
One, I mean, it was an art choice because, I mean, with 4x5, you're dealing with, it could be very hard to light. I mean, like, you can, but I felt like going outside where I had the beautiful sunlight, beautiful sunsets, I had more control over my camera than coming into somebody's home and introducing light. So it was totally art-based. I felt like I had more control of my camera outside without having to introduce light. So it was a pure art choice on that behalf. And I felt like I could still get the point across by showing their homes, by showing couples, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, the light actually in these photos is really beautiful. I was also struck by your use of selective focus, which we talked about at the opening a little bit in another at another time. But the fact that it's very evident that you're using the camera, the shifts and tilts of the camera to really focus in on faces. And leaving other parts of the photo blurred, specifically to kind of focus people's attention on the faces. Let's see, here's a question about the prom photographs. Let me find it here. Gabby asks, can you speak a bit more about the prom project, and if it will continue, perhaps what drew you to this project more specifically? I know you did talk a little bit about, you know, why you created that project during the pandemic and the kind of everyone being shut down and trapped in their homes. So, but yeah.
Yeah. Outside of everything that I mentioned, you know, I was going through a very interesting time in my life. I don't know if you guys are know Dave Ramsey, but I was listening to a lot of his talks. He talks about a lot about financial literacy, and like, it was like one of these times where I was realizing that, like, I had all these things around me that like I was just spending money on crazy, like clothes, camera gear. So like one day I had just exited my undergrad a few years before that. So I sold all my camera gear. The only thing that I kept was a Pentax 6.7. And for a long time, I was not accepting clients. I was not doing work. And I felt like I couldn't make images, even though I had this Pentax 6.7 sitting on this medium format film camera sitting on my shelf. I bought it, but never used it. But I was so moved about what was going on during COVID that I had to get up. And I had to make images. And I always had a love for film, but I think this, just because of where I was at in my life, it forced me to be able to have to explore it more. And now I love it. Now I love it.
All right, I think let's do one last, or try to do this one last question. This was, how do you think your move to Chicago will contribute to your current body of work? And that's from Lindsay.
Great question. So I am moving back to Chicago, which is my hometown, to pursue my MFA. And I think it's definitely going to be, interesting because I am from Chicago, and I think the images that I'll be able to make there is totally different from the images that I make here. For example, you look, most of the people that I photographed were middle-class people with homes, you know, in Chicago. I'm just, the sympathy that was shown to people in my photographs, because people saw homes, people saw people dressed very straightforward, you know, with their looking very polite for corporate America. Would that change if this person had a do-rag on? If this person maybe was sagging their pants? I don't agree with sagging pants, but I'm trying to say, does this person kind of lose the right to be able to protect their families? And I think it's a very complicated conversation to have, but I think it's very necessary because I'm from those neighborhoods, and I know that my grandfather lived in those neighborhoods, and my cousins and my aunts, and we have good working class people in those neighborhoods. Should they have to fear for their life just to go to work to make money? And will they have the same rights as these people in America, just because when you look at them, you see a different trope associated in the media, like you see a suit and tie versus a do-rag? Does these people lose their rights because you see a do-rag? And that's kind of what I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, let's see. I think we've covered most of them. There was another question about your upbringing, having a family who is a police officer. Maybe we can use that as the final question. I know we're just about at where we are at time, so we'll make that fairly short and just share that a little bit.
My upbringing, my father being a police officer, like I said, it definitely gave me an interesting outlook. I mean, look at the work that I'm creating now. Like, I have almost a double voice on a project where most people take a strong, hard stance. You know, I'm looking at both sides of this. And I definitely think it influenced my work in a way that I create art. Just living in Chicago, my father going to work and dealing with doctors, lawyers, and people like that, and coming home and seeing him still communicating with the people that was on the corner shooting dice, because he understood that he had to be friends with the people in the community to exist in a impoverished neighborhood, to be able to exist there as a police officer. So it just kind of taught me to not to be judgmental, keep my eyes open, you know, look at everybody as humans. And that's what I always try to do, look at everybody as human. And photography has really allowed me to do that and allowed me to be a better person.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your insightful questions. And thank you, Christian, for sharing your work and giving us the perspective on these wonderful photographs. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
So again, please join us for the panel where Christian will have the opportunity to speak with Stephen Shames, whose work on the Black Panthers to some degree also involved the notion of gun ownership and how African Americans are portrayed by the media. So it should be a really fascinating conversation on April 26th. So I hope you will all join us for that as well. So with that, I guess I will say good night for now.